Van wakes up in a huge bed inside the royal palace. At first, he thinks he's dreaming, but when he raises his hands, they look tiny, soft, weak. That's when it hits him. He's not in his old life anymore. In his previous world, he was just another tired adult stuck in a low-paying job, barely surviving each month. Every day felt the same. Wake up, work, stress, sleep, repeat. No excitement, no meaning. And now, he's been reborn as the young lord of a remote village in a completely different world. Still confused, Van climbs off the bed and stands on a small stool to look outside. The kingdom stretches far and wide, tall buildings, open land, calm skies. It feels unreal. Then his maid, Till, rushes in and panics. He's only 2 years old. Climbing like that is dangerous. But when Van calmly answers her in clear, mature words, she freezes. And hearing himself speak like that triggers something. Memories flood in. Not just his past life, but memories from this life too. The palace, his family, this world. The truth settles in. He really has been reincarnated. Later that day, he eats dinner with his father, Jalpa, and his siblings. The room is tense and quiet. Finally, Jalpa asks his second son what he plans to study: fire magic and battle formations. The third son? Magic too. Then Jalpa turns to Van. Van says he wants to study history and culture first because there's still so much he doesn't understand. The table goes silent. A 2-year-old shouldn't talk like that. Jalpa suddenly laughs, impressed. He says Van must have inherited strong fire magic like him and Van's mother. The aptitude test will happen at age 8. "Don't disappoint me," he says. In this world, magic decides everything. Fire, water, wind, earth, those are respected. Anything else? Useless. After breakfast, Van starts studying seriously. The head butler, Esparta, personally takes over his education. Strict, cold, ruthless. Van barely survives the lessons. But because of that, he learns to read and write in weeks. 2 years pass. At 4, he starts sword training. He's terrible at first, even loses to maids, but he keeps going. By 5, he's sparring with boys training to become soldiers and beating them. Their movements are predictable, slow. He reads them easily. Other kids start whispering, maybe he's special. Unlike his brothers, Van talks to commoners and makes friends. One day, the deputy knight commander examines Van's hands. No calluses. He hasn't trained long. Van admits he's been studying most of the time. The knight offers to train him personally. That turns into another nightmare. Brutal drills, no rest. Still, Van enjoys it. For the first time in his life, he feels alive. By 6, though, the routine becomes boring. Study, train, repeat. This isn't the fun life he wanted. So he decides to act like a normal child and go outside. At the market, he's amazed by the noise and color. Then he sees something that ruins it. A chained child being dragged through the street. The father says he's selling his son as a slave. Van learns the boy's magical aptitude is low, worth 3 silver coins. The father gets angry and starts kicking him. Van steps forward. "I'll pay 5. The man grabs the money and leaves. Van kneels and tells the boy that he's free. But the boy has nowhere to go, so Van offers him a place at the palace. To avoid trouble, they register him as Van's slave. A glowing mark seals the contract on Kamshin's hand. Van buys him new clothes. Days later, Van tries to enjoy a cookie. Kamshin interrupts. D is here for training. Van panics, hands over the cookie and hides. D ends up training Kamshin instead. 2 more years pass. Van turns 8. Time for the magic aptitude test. The entire town gathers. His parents expect strong fire magic. The crystal reveals his result. Production magic, the worst type. The crowd goes silent. Jalpa's face twists with rage. He draws his sword to kill Van for being a disgrace. Van can't move. Just before the strike, his older brother steps in and suggests another idea. Send Van to rule a remote village, secure loyalty there. Jalpa agrees. Van is disowned and told to leave immediately. No goodbye, no warmth. The next day, Van packs his belongings. Strangely, he feels excited. A quiet village sounds peaceful. Maybe now he can finally relax. Then Dee and Esparta announce they're coming too. Van sighs. Of course they are. His favorite maid insists on joining as well. With everyone ready, Van steps into the carriage and heads towards his new land. Exiled, called useless, but deep down he knows something his father doesn't. A second life isn't wasted on someone ordinary, and this time he plans to live it his way.
As the carriage rolls deeper into the forest, Van gets bored and decides to test his production magic again. He closes his eyes, focuses, and gathers his mana. A moment later, a tiny sword forms in his palm. Kamshin watches quietly from the side. He isn't surprised. He already knows Van learns production magic faster than anyone else. After a short silence, Van speaks up. He reminds Kamshin that he's no longer a noble. He's been banished and stripped of his status. There's no reason for Kamshin to stay as his slave anymore. If he wants freedom, Van will cancel the contract right now. Kamshin immediately shakes his head. He says he chose to follow Van. It wasn't forced. He swore his life to him, and he won't take it back. If protecting Van costs his life, he's ready for that. Van feels uneasy hearing that, but he can see the resolve in Kamshin's eyes, so he drops the topic. Suddenly, the carriage jerks to a stop. Van looks outside and freezes. The village ahead is under attack. Bandits swarm through the streets. Houses are burning. People are screaming. Dee quickly studies the enemy formation, around 50 attackers. From a numbers standpoint, they can win if they charge together. But Ortho, one of the adventurers traveling with them, disagrees immediately. Their contract is simple: protect Van, not save random villages. Since Van isn't being targeted, there's no reason to risk their lives. Dee's face tightens with anger. He says he refuses to watch innocent people die. Even if he fights alone, he's going. Before he moves, Esparta cuts in coldly. Charging blindly is foolish. If Dee dies here, the kingdom loses one of its strongest fighters. That damage can't be repaired. Instead, Esparta quickly lays out a strategy. He will raise a defensive wall to protect Van. The adventurers will fire long-range attacks from behind it. Once the enemy focuses on them, Dee and the knights will flank from one side. But Van instantly understands something. For the enemy to focus on one point, Esparta would have to stay behind as bait. Esparta confirms it without hesitation. If this fails, he dies. Van steps forward. He says he'll be the bait instead. Till immediately refuses. She'd rather die herself than let him do that. Kamshin stands firmly beside her. Van calmly tells them that because he cares about them, he won't risk their lives. He suggests riding the carriage straight into the bandits to draw attention. He reminds them he trained with the sword for years. And deep down, he accepts something else. If he dies protecting people, he won't regret it. Ortho stares at him, stunned. He remembers when he first met Van at the guild. He hated nobles, thought they were all selfish, but Van bowed to him, thanked him sincerely, and treated him with real respect. That memory changes something in him. Ortho steps in front of Van and says no child is risking his life today. Dee and Esparta agree. Esparta quickly adjusts the plan. He raises a massive defensive wall. The adventurers fire arrows from behind it, dropping the first wave of bandits instantly. Chaos spreads among the attackers. Then Dee and his knights charge from the left. Ortho's group storms from the right. The bandits panic. In the middle of the fight, their leader breaks through and rushes toward the weaker side of the defense. Just before he strikes, Van moves. He steps in and slices the bandit's Achilles heel. The bandit collapses, screaming. Kamshin follows up and finishes him. With their leader down, the remaining bandits surrender quickly. The village is saved. Some adventurers leave after the fight, but Ortho decides to stay. He's impressed, not just by Van's sword skills, but by his courage. Van steps forward and introduces himself to the village chief, Rondo, as their new lord. Rondo thanks him, but explains this isn't the first attack. Ever since night patrols stopped coming, bandits strike again and again. Van apologizes. He says higher nobles probably don't even know how bad things are here. Then he lays out 3 paths. First, create something valuable so the kingdom can't ignore them. Second, earn enough to hire mercenaries. Third, develop the village so it can defend itself. A young girl points out they've thought of all that before. Talking is easy, doing isn't. Van nods. He says words alone mean nothing. Then he cuts the tax from 30% to 10%. The villagers go silent in shock. Security comes next. Esparta raises a stone wall around the village. Dee promises to build a moat. Morale rises fast. That evening, Van tests his production magic again. He creates wooden blocks, but they're not normal wood. They're reinforced with ultra-strong nanofibers. Ortho tries to cut one. His sword doesn't even scratch it. Van spends hours crafting weapons and tools. Till worries he'll run out of mana, but he feels fine. He even gifts Kamshin a new sword. Kamshin nearly cries from happiness. Later, sitting by the campfire, Van realizes how tired everyone looks. Sleeping outdoors isn't sustainable, so the next morning he starts building. They stack nanoblocks in formation. Rondo jokes that it looks like the perfect spot for a lord's mansion. Van smiles and activates his magic fully. Mana surges. In seconds, walls rise, towers form, windows shape themselves. A massive mansion appears where empty land once stood. Everyone stands there speechless. Van looks at the structure and rubs his head. I might have made it a little too big.
The villagers stare in shock as a huge mansion rises in seconds. Cheers explode everywhere. Van stands there quietly and finally understands something important. His production magic isn't useless. It's perfect for ruling. Fire magic destroys. His magic builds. Commune runs up and loudly says he'd rather live here than under Lord Jalpa. Van ignores the comment. He knows Commune would follow him anywhere. Esparta steps forward and says the village doesn't need a warrior. It needs a builder. Dee and Ortho agree. They still can't believe Van created an entire mansion out of thin air. Van shrugs and says he can build houses for everyone if they bring lumber. That's all it takes. Knights and adventurers turn it into a competition. The villagers beg for new homes, too. Van looks around at the broken huts and cracked walls. He knows it'll drain him, but he agrees. By sunset, every home is rebuilt. Clean, strong, identical. No favoritism, no class difference. The villagers celebrate like it's a festival. For the first time, they feel hope. And Van realizes something else. The magic everyone mocked is now changing lives. Next, he builds a public bath near his manor. It was meant for him, but the villagers love it, so he lets them use it too. That night, Van relaxes in the bath with Commune. He notices Commune's muscles and feels slightly jealous. Then Dee suddenly shows up, completely naked, saying men bond better this way. Van immediately regrets everything. After hours of chaos, he finally escapes to bed. The next morning, the trench around the village is finished, but it's dry. No water, no moat. Van quickly makes a new plan. Esparta redirects river water. Dee and the knights dig. Van reinforces everything with production magic. By sunset, the canal reaches far enough to see the next village. Everyone is exhausted, except Dee and Esparta, who somehow look fresh. The next day, the water flows, the moat fills, the village is officially surrounded. Van goes further. He orders a lake built behind the village in case of flooding or drought. Smart insurance. When the lake fills, the villagers celebrate again. Water security means survival. Deep in the forest, two figures travel toward the area, a woman named Panamera and a noble girl named Art. They seem close, calm, focused. Back in the village, Van upgrades defenses again. He builds a massive rampart, then adds long-range ballista launchers with armored shields. What used to be a poor village now looks like a fortress. Dee mutters that Jompa made a mistake banishing Van. Esparta argues Van's power isn't built for conquest. Dee fires back. Defense wins wars too. Van cuts them off. Arguing changes nothing. Results do. At lunch, Esparta brings up money. The village needs income. Crops won't be enough forever. Van thinks, then remembers something critical: desserts. He can't live without proper sweets. So they brainstorm products to sell. Nothing stands out. The next day, Van tests weapons. Commune slices an orc's shield in half without trying. Zara almost cries. Van repairs it instantly. Ortho returns with ores from the forest. Van refines iron, crafts swords. Perfect balance, flawless edges. Everyone wants one. Then Esparta notices something rare in the pile: Mithro. That means only one thing: there's a dungeon nearby. Excitement rises, but also danger. If the kingdom finds out, they might take the land. If the Adventurer Guild finds out, they'll swarm it. So they decide to stay quiet, grow stronger first, prepare. Just then, armored lizards charge toward the village. Van raises the gates, orders everyone inside. Fear spreads. He steps forward and tells them not to panic. He can't win with power alone, so he asks them for something stronger: trust. Together, they will defend their home. The villagers refuse to hide while Van fights alone. They step forward and say they'll fight together. One village, one battle. Van feels proud. He thanks them and orders everyone to the ramparts. Move fast, no panic. Ortho and his party are out hunting, so they're not here. That makes things worse. Van prepares to climb the wall, but Till grabs his arm. She's scared for him. She doesn't want him risking his life. Before Van can argue, Dee steps in. "I'll check first," he says. Dee climbs the rampart and scans the field. His face turns serious. 40 armored lizards. Van freezes. That's far more than expected. Dee knows how bad this is. Even veteran soldiers struggle to kill one armored lizard, and 40 are charging at them. Still, he refuses to back down. "Load the ballista. Fire on my command." The bolts fly. 10 lizards drop instantly. Dee stares in shock. Van's weapons are far stronger than he thought. They reload, fire again, more fall. Hope rises. Then it crashes. They're out of iron bolts. Several lizards are still coming. Fear spreads. Dee considers jumping down to fight directly. Then Van shouts from below, "Use the wooden bolts!" Everyone hesitates. Wood? Against armor harder than steel? But Dee trusts Van. "Load the wooden bolts!" They fire. The wooden bolts punch straight through the lizards' heads. Clean, precise, deadly. The last monsters fall. Silence. Then cheering. No casualties. Minimal losses. Dee shakes his head in disbelief. Van isn't just lucky. He's different. Later, the villagers skin the lizards and prepare the meat. Van suggests a feast. That night, the whole village celebrates. They eat well. They laugh. For once, they feel safe. By the fire, Ortho explains the value. One armored lizard normally sells for 20 gold. After spoilage and transport, maybe 8. Van does the math. Around 300 gold total. His eyes widen. That's a fortune. Then Esparta drops the bad news. Anything over 100 gold, 50% tax to the marquis. Van's excitement dies. Worse, too much profit brings attention. If his father notices, he might move Van again. Van wants peace, not politics. Esparta suggests a solution. Give the credit to his older brother, Mirka. Let him take the glory. Keep the village out of the spotlight.
Van agrees. Smart move. The next day, two merchants arrive, Belle and Rango. They expected a poor backwater village. Instead, they see walls, weapons, and piles of armored lizard skins. They're stunned. They buy everything. Van also shows them his weapons. Perfect balance, clean craftsmanship. They want them all. Van suggests opening a shop inside the village. They hesitate, probably wanted control. Van smiles calmly. Better to grow profits slowly than explode too fast. They agree. In under 5 minutes, Van builds them a shop. The merchants are speechless. Outside the gates, two new visitors arrive, Art and Panamera from Ferdinando County. They enter the village and meet Van. Panamera quickly realizes he's not an ordinary child. He's thinking like a ruler. She reveals why they came. Ferdinando worries about future conflict, so she offers Art's hand in marriage to secure peace. Van declines politely. No need for marriage. As long as no one starts trouble, there won't be war. Panamera laughs. She expected an arrogant noble. Instead, she sees someone calm, capable, and honest. Van demonstrates his production magic, blocks, structures, precision. Panamera and Art are stunned. When Van explains he was exiled for having production magic, Panamera calls it foolish. His father threw away a kingdom-building talent. That night, Van builds them a luxury inn in minutes. At dinner, Art watches him closely. He's kind, responsible, direct. She starts to feel something. Before bed, Van realizes something too. Art was likely rejected for lacking elemental magic, just like him. They're both outsiders. From that moment, Van decided to respect her choices, not treat her like a political tool. That night, Art hugs her pillow and thinks about tomorrow. For the first time in a long time, she's excited about the future.
Early the next morning, Till and Commune drag Van out of bed. There's something strange at the lake. Van groans, but he follows them anyway. When he arrives, villagers are gathered around the water. At the center, a girl with a fishtail floats calmly, staring at everyone. Esparta explains she's an Akaloo, a rare water race that almost no one ever sees. Van tries talking to her. No response. So he offers food. The moment he places armored lizard meat near the water, she swims over and politely asks for it. After one bite, her eyes widen. Where did this come from? Who killed the lizard? Before Van can downplay it, the villagers proudly say he defeated them. The Akaloo immediately dives back underwater. Esparta assumes that's the last they'll see of her. He's wrong. The next day, an entire group of Akaloos fills the lake. A large, intimidating one steps forward. He introduces himself as Latvesta, ruler of the Akaloos. The girl from yesterday is his daughter, Priora. He asks if Van truly defeated the armored lizards. Van confirms. The Akaloos gasp. A child did that? Then Latvesta drops a bomb. He offers Priora's hand in marriage. Van nearly chokes. He asks why. Latvesta explains that armored lizards have terrorized his people for years. If Van is strong enough to defeat them, an alliance through marriage would protect his village. Van understands. This isn't romance, it's strategy. He calmly refuses the marriage, but promises to protect the Akaloos anyway. Latvesta is surprised, but impressed. Instead, he asks if his people can move near the village for safety. Van agrees, and instantly builds a large resting area for them beside the lake. The Akaloos are stunned at how fast he constructs it. Soon after, Esparta reminds Van about sewage management. Van reveals his system. Pipes under every house. Release water from the lake and it flushes everything clean. Latvesta is fascinated and offers to help, saying water control is their specialty. Van accepts. From then on, the Akaloos handle the flushing system daily as their contribution. Just then, Art and Panamera arrive and freeze when they see Latvesta. Before leaving, Latvesta casually calls Van son-in-law. Art stiffens. Van tries to deny it, but Priora suddenly pops out of the water and happily calls him husband before diving back down. Now Art looks even more upset. To clear things up, Van takes Art on a quiet boat ride and explains everything. She eventually understands it was political, not romantic. They start relaxing until Priora and her friends surround the boat. Priora looks jealous. Van reminds her they are not engaged. She sinks underwater in frustration. Her friends start rocking the boat violently. Chaos. Later, Latvesta hears that Van was alone with Art. He proposes a competition. If the Akalus win, Van must marry Priora. Van thinks it's ridiculous. Dee immediately accepts. The village agrees. Van chooses the first event, volleyball. No one knows the game. Till and Panamera versus Latvesta and Priora. The Akalus dominate, they win easily. Next event, swimming relay, Latvesta's choice. Van knows this is unfair, but Commune and Dee step up. The race begins. Commune keeps up with Priora. Then Dee takes over and absolutely crushes it with powerful strokes. Humans win. Final event, Van's choice. He quickly creates an ice machine. Shaved ice speed eating contest. Art volunteers, so does Van. Brain freezes everywhere, but Van and Art push through and win. Latvesta shakes Van's hand with a smile, but he still calls him son-in-law before swimming away. Van sighs in frustration. Meanwhile, Art watches everything quietly. She remembers her past, neglected by her parents, called useless for her marionette magic. She once hoped to make them proud. Instead, they rejected her. Van is different. His useless magic built a village. He's kind, calm, strong. She decides she wants to become stronger too, in her own way. The next morning, Van gathers everyone. More ramparts need to be built. Expansion plans begin. And tonight, a big barbecue. The villagers cheer. Art asks if she can watch Van work. He agrees. But deep in the forest, Ortho and his team are running again. Something powerful is chasing them. Another threat is coming.
Back at the village, no one knew what was happening outside the walls. They were too busy staring at the massive ramparts Van had finished in less than 2 weeks. The walls were tall, solid, and strong. Everyone was amazed. Panamera walked up to Van, clearly stunned. She always believed he was talented, but this was on another level. Van quickly looked away to avoid awkward eye contact and said he needed to supervise more house construction. More merchants and adventurers would arrive soon, and they needed space. Panamera admitted she felt jealous. She had always dreamed of ruling her own land. Seeing Van control and build everything made her want the same. She silently decided she would earn her own territory one day. Her eyes then landed on the giant machines mounted on the walls. "What are those?" "Ballistae," Van replied, "long-range weapons." He told Commune to fire one. The bolt shot out like lightning and slammed into the ground with terrifying force. Panamera froze. The power shocked her. Then she learned Van had built over 100 of them. She immediately asked to buy one. Van refused, so she offered a favor instead. Van agreed. One favor in the future. Deal made. Commune then showed her one of Van's custom iron weapons and sliced her spare sword in half effortlessly. Her eyes widened. "Ordinary iron," Van said calmly. She asked for some of the special bolts, too. Van allowed it. That's when everything changed. Ortho and his team came sprinting out of the forest. Behind them, a massive forest dragon. Ortho shouted for everyone to run. They would distract it. Van felt cold. Leaving them meant death. Panamera stepped forward calmly. She would fight. Van ordered everyone behind the walls. Art was escorted inside. Dee and the soldiers prepared. The dragon entered range. Ballistae fired. The dragon dodged every single shot. Van's heart sank. Then Panamera raised her hand. A massive fire javelin formed and shot forward. It struck the dragon hard. Flames exploded across its scales. Everyone stared in shock. She was far stronger than they realized, but the dragon was still alive. Van ordered a second volley. Some bolts pierced its wings. Good sign. Another volley.
This time, the dragon dodged everything it had learned. Ortho's team made it back inside the wall. Van needed one opening. Panamera created it. Another fire javelin burned the dragon's wings and slowed it. "Retreat!" Van shouted. They ran. But the dragon recovered fast and landed on the rampart. It healed too quickly. Esparta calmly stepped forward and used earth magic to trap it in stone for a moment. They escaped. At the gate, Van turned to Panamera. He was calling in his favor. When the dragon arrived again, she would pin it. The ballistae would finish it. She agreed. The dragon arrived. The ballistae weren't fully loaded yet. They needed time. Dee and his men charged out with Van's weapons, buying seconds with their lives. They were forced back, but it was enough. "Now!" Van shouted. Panamera launched a fire javelin and pinned the dragon. The ballistae fired. Heavy bolts slammed into its body. The dragon collapsed. Dee approached carefully. One eye opened. In one clean strike, Dee cut off its head. Silence. Then cheers exploded across the village. They had killed a forest dragon. Art rushed to Van. He was fine. Panamera praised his plan. No normal village could survive this. A ceremony was held that evening. Dee received the title of Dragon Slayer. Panamera honored every fighter. Then she called Van forward. Without his plan, none of us would be alive. The crowd roared his name. As she looked at Van, Panamera thought about her past, her rise from a low knight to a respected viscountess. She had worked with nobles her whole life. None were like Van. Art had changed too. She was braver now. Van was different. So in front of everyone, Panamera made a bold declaration. She offered an equal alliance. Van was surprised, but he understood the value. His father had abandoned him. Noble support was rare. He accepted. And just like that, an official alliance was born between Van and Viscount Panamera.